Child is the New York Times bestselling author of the Paul McGrath and Jack Reacher novels. He has a diverse background, from theater to telecommunication to roles where the UK Official Secrets Act was invoked, the ideal background for a thriller writer. He lives in Wyoming with his talented wife, author Tasha Alexander. Andrew, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Ian, thank you so much. And Ryan, too, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
So, speaking of Wyoming, you moved there a few years ago with Tasha, going from an urban lifestyle in Chicago to the open plains. Now, how has this move affected your writing?
I think it's been really helpful, honestly, because as you know, one thing that you really need when you're writing is peace, quiet, and the ability to just focus on the world that you're creating in your head. And I loved living in Chicago. It's a wonderful, wonderful city. But there was always something happening. There was even in the middle of the night, you'd hear sirens, you'd hear motorcycles going past. Everything it's as if they were conspiring. At one point, I felt like the little room that I worked in, I really felt like there must be a web camera in there, because every time I went to sit down, somebody would start refurbishing the building. They rebuilt the fire escape that went off my office. They repointed the tuck pointing 2 years in a row. And then our neighbors sold their apartment, and even though it was nicer than ours, they counted it as being a tear down, so everything got ripped out. So again, another whole summer of noise. So it was just one thing after another, making it so that there was a little part of your brain, especially when you write thrillers, you're curious, aren't you? You're always intrigued. What is that sound? And then your imagination picks up on it and starts turning into other things. There's all kinds of noises around you. You can't help but latch onto them and start getting into sort of flights of imagination that don't necessarily help what you're trying to work on. So being out here has been wonderful. I mean, the problem is kind of not looking at the view. I kind of sit with my computer screen, so it's blocking the window, because otherwise I might just be staring out all day long. But there's really no distractions. There are no people around. In fact, we see more moose than we see people. So, there's not too much to distract us, which is a beautiful thing.
And just to give our viewers an idea, how long would it take you to get into the nearest town?
It takes about 40 minutes, assuming that it's not snowing or it's not mud season or anything like that. It's, we get crazy snow here, and it starts. In fact, we've already had the first snow of the year. We had it a couple of weeks ago. Didn't last too long, but it's getting to that point where each time it falls, it gets a little deeper and stays a little longer. So before long, we're going to be, we're going to have times where if we needed to get anywhere, it would be possible, but it would be quite a struggle. So we tend to just say, well, in that case, we'll just stay home, because we stock the fridge, we stock up with dry goods, and then if the weather's not good, who cares? We just stay home.
Lovely.
So, Andrew, I know you now a couple of books into writing Jack Reacher. I just want to go back to the beginning, if you don't mind. The moment that you realized you'd be writing this iconic character, and with your brother, no less. What went through your mind, and also how did this process come to be?
Oh my goodness! I know, what a crazy thing. It actually all started. It was the day that my last Paul McGrath book was launched. It came out in January. I think it was January 19. The year, especially with the pandemic, they all kind of blur in. But I guess it was January 19, and because we live in southern Wyoming now, the launch was going to be at the Tattered Cover in Denver. So my brother's got a house. It's next door but one. So in Wyoming terms, that's 3.5 miles away. So I said to him, do you want to come down to the launch with me? So he said he would. And then he said, well, why don't we go in my car so I can smoke? So I said, yeah, that's fine. So he drove down. And you know what it's like when you're going to do one of those events, you kind of focused on it. You're thinking, please don't let me say anything stupid. Please don't let me trip over my feet when I'm getting on the stage. There are all of those things going through your head. So I wasn't really thinking too much about what might be going on with him, to be honest. I was just thinking about getting this event done. And it went well, fortunately. And we got in the car to drive back, and he said to me, well, why don't you drive home? So I said, okay. So we set off, and the further north we get, given that it's January, it's late at night, it's northern Colorado, The weather was atrocious. We had what they call a ground blizzard, which is where you've got snow and ice blowing horizontally in front of you, just right, 0 feet above the ground. So it's horrible conditions to drive in. And I remember saying to him, there's a good it's 50-50. We might end up at home or we might end up in a ditch. I can't promise you which. So horrible driving. And it turned out that was actually something he'd anticipated and built into the plan, because what he did was, as we was making our way through this dreadful snow, he turned and said to me, so I'm thinking of retiring. And, looking back, I feel a little bit ashamed, really, because if I was a nice brother, I would have said, yes, of course you should retire. You've worked incredibly hard for all of these years. You've brought all this pleasure to so many readers. You've helped so many people in the industry. Of course you should retire. You should take some time. You should enjoy the fruits of your labor. You should absolutely do it. But I'm not a nice brother. Instead, I said to him, well, what are you talking about, retire? What's going to happen to Reacher? Because I'm the world's first Reacher fan. I read the first Reacher when it was still written in pencil. And so I just couldn't get my head around this idea that Reacher might come to an end. And he said, well, maybe you might like to write him with me or take over writing him. I can't remember the exact words, because I was just so shocked, because he's got this amazing global phenomenon that he created, that and to trust it to anybody, let alone me, I just thought it blew my mind. And then as I thought about it, there must have been something in the way that he phrased it. It kind of sounded a little bit like a challenge to me. And so that made me think, can I do it? And the trouble with me is, my whole life, anything that sounds like a challenge, it just gets me in so much trouble. And I can never turn my back on a challenge. So that was bad. But then the final thing, the thing that just clinched the deal, really, was that thought that not only if I said no, there would be no more Reacher, but it would be my fault. And I thought, no, I can't face that. So I'm going to have to just go ahead and say, yeah, I'll do it.
I love that the genesis of you coming on is is the same conditions of the opening of a previous Reacher book, 61 Hours, right? Which is one of my favorite ones, where Reacher stuck in the snowstorm.
Yeah,
That seems fitting.
That is an absolutely fascinating answer. I also love 61 Hours. I felt like cold reading the entire book. And I,
Absolutely.
and I can imagine the mood of driving in one of those, because, of course, I live in Toronto, Canada. So being there, have that T-shirt. But what I'd love to talk to you about next is there seems to be, and I really readily identify, a distinctive cadence to the writing that is signature to the Reacher books. I love that, actually. I can just feel it. Do you feel that writing has a rhythm like music, and do you consciously use that signature beat?
absolutely, Kim. You're 100% right. And that was the biggest thing for me, really, when it came to coming on board and joining in with the writing, because in terms of understanding the character, I really wasn't worried, because, as I
Mhm.
said, all the way back when Killing Floor was in pencil, Killing Floor is first person, so you're seeing everything through Reacher's eyes, and it's ages before you find out his name. And I remember so clearly thinking, I don't know this character's name, but I know this character. So he comes from my brother's subconscious. He's very similar to me. We react to things the same. We have almost the same taste. We have the same attitudes. So, a character that comes from those, I wasn't worried about, if I put Reacher in a certain situation, would I know what he would do? Would I know how he would react? I was totally happy that I could do that. What I was more conscious of is the writing, because, there's that old cliche, isn't there, that easy reading is hard writing. And I think a lot of the times it drives me crazy sometimes when you see people writing about some of Lee's earlier books, saying, well, the writing's nothing special, but, you pick it up at the beginning and then it kind of grabs you and it doesn't let you go and you have to read it all the way to the end. And you think, well, that is exactly what proves the writing is special, because it doesn't happen by accident. It was a very deliberate, very specific technique that he developed. And so I was very conscious that it would be necessary for me to use the same thing. And in a way, it was peculiar because I'd written my other books, I'd written 9 books on my own, and I was very conscious that I didn't want them to sound like his books. You know, I wanted it to have my own distinctive voice so that no one would say, oh, well, you know, it's just a knockoff of Reacher. I wanted it to be completely different from Reacher. So then to have to turn around 180 degrees instantly, and then start, instead of deliberately not sounding like him, you know, to deliberately sound like him, you know, it was a bit of a readjustment, but in a way, one that came quite easily because, you know, it does, you know, that voice, you know, it's his voice and it's similar to my natural one, I think. And so it was really almost that I had to stop not sounding like him and just let myself go. And one of the biggest things that we are happy about is that at the beginning, when we started writing the Sentinel, the first one that we did together, we said we're never going to reveal who wrote what bit, you know. And it's lovely because, you know, people will email or get in touch through social media or whatever, and they'll say, oh, I figured it out, I know that you did this bit and he did that bit. And no one has nailed it yet, even our editors. You know, we've got editors in London and New York. Even they couldn't tell you which part he wrote and which part I wrote, which to me is the biggest, you know, the biggest hallmark of success is readers liking the books. That's what really counts. But you know, the next one is the fact that we've managed to put the prose together in such a way that it's seamless and it just flows in the way that we want it to flow.
It's fascinating because we've seen other iconic characters like Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Mark Graney wrote with him and had to really learn to write like Tom Clancy and also write 180,000 word manuscripts. We saw Kyle Mills take over for Vince Flynn with a book that had been started and then really had to meld his voice with Vince's. So I'm fascinated by this process, Andrew, because I can't get over the fact that you were an established writer. Have you struggled? Have there been any unforeseen challenges trying to, I guess, mimic your brother, mimic Lee's writing style? Has there been any challenges you haven't seen? Do you have to adopt any of his quirks? Also, by the way, I think it's pretty known that Lee has to have the first sentence of the book written by a certain date. You know, are these things that you also are now taking on? And do you have a favorite book in the series?
They really are. And, you know, first of all, let me say, you know, Mark and Kyle, they both have done an amazing job in continuing those series. And that was something that I looked at and something that I thought about when I was wondering, you know, have I really done the right thing here? Have I committed to something that's impossible? You know, they did such a good job of it. It was very encouraging. And then when it came around to it, yeah, you're absolutely right. Because he got fired from his previous job on August 31st, it means that he has to start the new one on September the 1st every year. That's just a, you know, that's a given. And we've done it 3 times now. You know, the Sentinel, Better Off Dead, and the one that will be coming out next year. So September the 1st is sacrosanct. And you know, we do have a lot of the same habits. You know, neither of us are particularly great in the morning, so I was really delighted that this interview was going to be in the afternoon because it meant I would hopefully be a little bit more cogent than I would be if it was at, you know, 8 o'clock or something. So we're neither of us good in the morning. We both love our coffee. You know, we drink ridiculous amounts of it, and you know, so those things are the same. But in terms of what was the biggest challenge, or I guess it wasn't even particularly unforeseen. I knew it was going to be there, but then you never know what impact it's going to have on you until you are actually, you know, encountering it. And that was the difference in the way that he plans his books, or rather,
Hmm.
doesn't plan his books.
Hmm.
You know, he's I don't know whether it's famous or notorious for never outlining, never planning, just making every decision as he comes to it. And I was never a huge outliner. You know, I was never one of the people that would write, you know, every scene of every chapter of every part of the book. I wasn't like that, but I did like to have a sense of where I was going, so that I had some confidence that I wasn't, you know, going down a blind alley or wasting my time. He really just does not work that way, and so there would be times where we finished a scene and we would talk about it and say, yeah, we're happy with that. That seems good. And I'd say, right, well, what happens next? And he'd say, well, I don't know. And, the first time that happened, I was like, what do you mean you don't know? And so, that was probably the biggest adjustment was getting into this way of working without, it's like walking, it's the tightrope without the safety net. And without wanting to get too sort of, English literature about it, I think it actually comes across in the writing because the Reacher books, if you look at the first 24 that Lee wrote on his own, they are the writing is confident, it
Mhm.
carries you because it has that confidence. And I think part of that is because it's like walking on the tightrope without the safety net. You have to have the confidence that you'll reach the other side because there is nothing to catch you if you fall off. And during writing the first one, I did actually a couple of times kind of sneak off when we'd finished the bit we were working on together. I'd kind of sneak off and I would kind of put a few ideas together and a few thoughts together. Even in terms of, I had a whole sequence in my mind about a different location where none of it worked. None of it worked. And it sounds crazy because obviously characters are made up, but you just can't make Reacher go where he doesn't want to go. If you start off saying, well, I want him to go here and do this, it's not going to work. He's going to go where he wants and do what he wants. So I had to really just settle into that mode of not worrying about the fact that I was writing a scene without knowing what the next scene was going to be. And so, that was the main adjustment when we did the Sentinel. And then for Better Off Dead, I kind of knew what was in store a little bit more. So it was the same process, but it just felt that little bit more familiar to me since we'd survived it the first time. It gave me some confidence that I could survive it again. So that was that part. And in terms of favorite books, that's such a difficult question. I mean, it's
Mhm.
probably worse for Lee than me since he wrote all of those ones. But I think if I had to, I would cheat very slightly if to answer that question, and I would want to narrow it down to two. And the first one would be Killing Floor because not only is it such a magnificent book, and not only does it introduce Reacher to the world in such a memorable way, but it also was very significant to us in the family because, like we said earlier, Lee was out of work; he'd lost his job. I had a good job at the time. I was working for a telecommunications company, and I was doing fine. So when he gets in touch and says, the way that I've decided to feed my family, after being fired, is to write books, you're thinking, oh God, what's going to happen now? And then he sent me the manuscript because he knew I was the biggest thriller reader in the family. So I'm reading it thinking, if this book is no good, first of all, I'm going to have to be the one who calls up my brother and says, sorry, mate, your book's a disaster. But on top of that, I'm then thinking, well, how's he going to eat? Am I going to have to send him food parcels now? Am I going to have to let him live in my spare room? How are we going to deal with this? So, that period of time reading the book and getting used to it was enormous. And then, we went on this crazy, funny how things completely changed because I'd read the book, I was super excited about it. Obviously there's a gap between manuscript stage and publication. So when the physical books came out, I was going to everybody I knew saying, "You've got to buy my brother's book. You've got to buy my brother's book. Oh, he uses a pen name. It's Lee Child, but you've got to buy the book." And everyone's like, "What, Lee Ho? That sounds weird. Oh, I don't know." And then fast forward 10 years, and every September, August, September, leading up to publication, everybody would be coming to me saying, "Hey, can you get your brother to sign a book? Can we, can you sign one for me, for my aunt, for my uncle?" Everybody. It was. I can remember always looking back, thinking, no one would buy them in the beginning when I was trying to get them to, and now you can't. So yeah, so Killing Floor. Not only the book, but also the sort of sentimental attachment to it. And I think the other one that I would pick would be Make Me, because Make Me has all of the ingredients that you want in a Reacher book. It's
Mhm.
got the memorable setting. It's got Reacher, showing up in town on this whim. He likes the sound of the town name. He wants to know more about it. He detects that there's some kind of weird conspiracy going on. He digs into it. People try to run him off. He won't go. There's fights. There's investigations. There are conclusions that he draws. And they go to a couple of other places too. But all the ingredients are there. But I think with Make Me, you know, Kim, going back to your question about the language, you know, I did English literature at university. I'm very interested in this kind of thing, and I think that the language in Make Me was all of the books are amazing in terms of the language, but I think the prose in Make Me is just even on an even higher level, and it's just even without the content, just the prose itself is just a pleasure to read. So. You know, it's a narrow margin maybe because they're all amazing, but that would be the one I would pick. If it was one of those desert island situations and you had to pick one to take with you, I think that would probably be the one.
Yeah, I agree with you. Great choices, by the way. Love it. The opening pages of Better Off Dead are absolutely captivating, action packed. You're immediately drawn into the story. I'm always impressed with the fight scenes. What to you makes for an incredible fight scene?
Well, I think it's something that Lee's talked about in the past, which is, he has this technique of the way he describes it is writing the slow stuff fast and the fast stuff slow. And I think that particularly applies to the fight scenes because, well, two things apply to the fight scenes, really. One is that sense of doing something that could be gone in a blink of an eye. You stretch it out and explain it. And I think the other aspect to it, because years and years ago when I was younger and less decrepit, I used to do karate, and our karate teacher always said, "You fight with your brain, not with your body." And so, what you really see that in the Reacher fight scenes because Reacher's enormous. He's so strong he could just pummel anybody who comes near him. But what you gain from the way that Lee always writes those scenes, and what I've been trying to do as well, is you see why Reacher does the things that he does. And Reacher slows down time in his mind. He looks at the situation, six guys lined up, however, whatever it might be, and he looks at the different ways that he could approach that fight. Which one should he hit first? How much should he taunt them before he goes into action? All of those things. So I think that part of the enjoyment is that it throws a light on that mental aspect that goes along with the just the purely physical. Because Reacher hit the one in the middle, so what? But if you know why he hit the one in the middle, what is the reason behind it, why he thinks it was a good idea, how it will set him up for the next phase, that just makes it more interesting and more satisfying. So I think that's for me the key to it. Plus, of course, that kind of vicarious satisfaction of watching Reacher pummeling all these these unpleasant people. And that's one of the fun things in the Reacher. There's always somebody emerges, and okay, well, that guy is having his ass handed to him by Reacher before the end of the book, and that's when it finally happens, it's always very, very satisfying, I think.
And also, do you think too, like I always think about sexual tension in books is much more compelling in some ways than the actual act if it's consummated. The same with I was just thinking as you were saying that about the fight scenes, about anticipating. And I think that's really that builds that suspense and the anticipation and the excitement of seeing that happen, you know?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
It truly does. And, there are some things that come as surprises, obviously, but then there are other things that are so satisfying because it's going to happen. So you don't necessarily know how, you might not know when, but it's coming. And then, each time perhaps Reach crosses paths with somebody, then it will like, oh, is it going to be now? Is it going to be now? Just like you say, just like if it's a sexual thing as opposed to a violence thing, it's really, really satisfying. Yeah.
Kind of segues perfectly to my next question. Because if you don't mind, I want to talk about the movies and the TV show. So I might be in the minority. I really like the Tom Cruise Jack Reacher movies. To the point we were just talking about here with the fight scenes, I thought they captured those really well. When Tom Cruise sort of lines up the bad guys in the first one and explains, you always take out the big one first, and then there's the guy that always runs, and I loved all that. So if you don't mind, why do you think that those movies didn't sit as well with the book fans? And do you have any idea what's going on with the TV show?
Okay, those are great questions, and I've got to tell you, Ryan, I'm actually in your camp on this one because I thought that the movies were great. I
Yeah,
enjoyed
I
both
liked
of them,
them.
Mhm.
and the thing was, okay, obviously Tom Cruise isn't 6'5". That
Yeah.
just has to be said and got out of the way. But what he really did capture was, and the scene that you mentioned with the fight with all of those guys, the one that came immediately before it, reaches in the diner,
Mhm.
just wanting to have his dinner, and a woman comes up and kind of provokes the confrontation that leads to that fight. And what you could see, the way that Tom Cruise approached that, he had that world weary look. I'm not looking for trouble. But if you are, then that's exactly what you're going to get. You know, he made
Mhm.
it clear. You can see, not verbally, just from his body language, I'd rather we didn't have to do this. But if we have to, you know. And so I think he captured the character. And I'm always about the character. You know, the character, I think he really, really did a good job with. But I think sometimes if somebody comes out of something like a movie or a play and they haven't enjoyed it and they're trying to put their finger on why, this is a bit like why being an editor is really hard, because
Mhm.
if you wrote a book and it doesn't quite work, all you often know is that it didn't work. It doesn't. You might not know why not, and therefore it's hard to help the author to fix it. I think it's like that with movies, and I think that some people came out of the movies with this sense that they hadn't quite worked in some ways, and they kind of blamed it on the size thing or whatever it might be. But to me, what it is that exactly as Kim was saying before about the fights, you know, it's not just physical. People remember them because there's a physical aspect, but so much of it is actually cerebral. It's how Reacher thinks about it. And the same applies to the conclusions that he reaches. A lot of the readers will say what they like most about reading a Reacher book is thinking along with Reacher. You know, you're presented with this thing that just looks completely inexplicable, total mystery. Reacher kind of teases out the clues and then puts them together so that they make sense. And they make sense in a way that is simultaneously a surprise because you couldn't see it at the beginning, but also it when it's presented to you, it makes sense. And the thing is that that can go through to be convincing and to be satisfying in the books. That can take pages, you know, Reacher can walk into a room, something's hidden in the room, no one's got any idea where it is, but Reacher figures it out and finds it under a loose floorboard or something. In the movies, there's not time because you've got 90 minutes. You know, the Reacher books are quite long, and you've got 90 minutes. And so it boils down to kind of Reacher walks into the room and says, "Oh, look, it must be under that floorboard," you know, and it almost
Mhm.
becomes cartoonish. You know, it takes away what's good and it replaces it with something that's much worse. And to me, that was the unsatisfying part of the movie. And I think that's why the decision to move to the TV was so sensible,
Mhm.
because you know, when Lee did the original deal with the studio that Tom Cruise was involved with, there wasn't streaming television. This was years ago. You know, this was
Mhm.
years and years ago, because everything takes so long of movies and TV. So it wasn't as if he looked at it and said, "No, I don't want to do TV. I'd rather do the movie." The movie was the only option at the time. But now there is an option, which is I mean, there's obviously regular broadcast TV, but you know, the Reacher books have that kind of narcotic, addictive quality, which you get through streaming TV because you can binge, and you get the luxury of as much time as you need. So you know, if you think about the first movie, which was based on one shot, so it's one
Mhm.
book compressed into 90 minutes. The first season of the TV show is going to be Killing Floor. So here we have an entire season based on one book. And of course, you can explore all of those nuances. You can establish the characters. You can see how Reacher thinks. You can work along with him as he figures everything out. So I haven't actually seen any of it, but from what I've heard, it's really good. Everybody who's been involved with it is super excited about it. It wound up being filmed in Canada, Kim, because they were going to do it in Georgia originally because that's where the book was set. So they thought, you know, stick close. But with COVID and the issues around having a set with the closed set with enough protection for the everyone who's working on it, it wound up being that Canada was a better option. So they established a complete bubble up there. They actually built the town of Margrave, I'm told, in Canada, out of wood or whatever. But they made it. They made a set that was the entire town, and the restrictions were eased just enough for Lee to be able to go up for about the final week of filming. So he got to meet the cast and he got to see how they were working, and he said that it is it's absolutely excellent. He's really, really happy with it, and he's seen. I think the first 3 episodes, something like that, have gone through post production. They've been screen tested, and the ratings have been off the scale. And it sounds fabulous. I just can't wait. I'm feeling two things really. One is I can't wait to watch it, and two, I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, if they are doing a whole book per season, how many seasons is it going to be till we get to the Sentinel? I want them to do that, but eventually it might happen. But in the meantime, I think it's going to be super satisfying, and I think it's going to automatically overcome. I mean, A, they've got an actor who's enormous, and B, it's going to overcome that issue that I was saying before about compressing
Mhm.
everything. So you lost the unique quality that Reacher brings.
Well, I mean, Amazon's done a great job with the Bosch series from Michael Connolly's. I think this would be similar in some ways that they can stretch out the storylines to be truer to the source material, which I think book fans want, obviously. And the actor, forgive me, I forgot the actor's name playing him now, but he's a big guy. So I think book
Yeah,
fans will like seeing that too.
Mhm.
I think so. I think it's going to be. I think the movies were sort of a near miss, but I think that the TV is going to be an absolute bullseye, and I can't wait for it to be out there and everybody to be binging away.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I actually much prefer TV series these days than movies because I just feel like there's a richness to the story and you follow the characters and fall in love with them and you spend more time with them. So, I think this is going to work out very, very well. So just to
Yeah,
switch
I think.
topics, for a moment, let's talk about football, or as Americans call it, soccer. And of course, you've been a long time Aston Villa fan, a team that has had its ups and downs for sure. And I wondered how you felt about them selling Jack Grealish.
Yeah, I mean, I was. That was, you're absolutely right. Villa is, totally topsy turvy history. When I was born, Villa were in the old third division. And during my lifetime, I saw them go from there to being champions of Europe. Which is the best you can do really as a football club. So they've seen the lows, they've seen the highs, and then in the meantime, they've been in the middle. We always say in football, it's the hope that kills you. So every season, you start off thinking that something might happen. And yeah, something really lovely did happen when Jack Grealish came through because, Jack is from Birmingham like me. The Villa fans love someone that they consider to be one of their own. And not only was he one of our own, but he was phenomenal. A most amazing talent, one of the most talented players, certainly that's come through the academy or who's played for the club in a long, long time. And so, in your heart, you just wanted him to stay forever. You wanted him to be. He was already captain of the club. You wanted him there for the rest of his career. You wanted him to cement, all of that promise into becoming a total legend. And of course, it didn't happen because in his latest, whatever was the last contract he signed, there was a release clause. So when Manchester City show up with a heap of money, the club can't stop him. They can't turn it down. It's all based on the player, whether he wants to go. And he chose that he did. He chose, the prospect of winning more medals and more silverware, which is a totally legitimate personal decision to make. But you see, where it also comes in, because over the summer there was all this, Willie won't he going on in the press. And in your heart, you want him to stay because he's a Villa fan, you're a Villa fan. But part of me, in my head, was saying, well, actually, no. It actually wouldn't. It probably would be a good thing to sell him, particularly for the amount of money that's involved, because he was such a special player. And a club of Villa's size, that meant that everything that they did on the pitch was focused on him, which has two repercussions. One is the opponents know that they've only got one player to smother, really, and then, the flame goes out. And the other one is that when he gets injured, and over the last 3 seasons, he was consistently injured for at least a third of each season, then the club, the club had no plan B. There was no alternative. They didn't have somebody else that could step off the bench and get anywhere close to his level. So what the club did was actually really sensible. They realized they couldn't stop him because of the contractual situation. They knew that they were getting a heap of money in, and they managed to balance the incoming and outcome. They held on to him long enough that they could bring in replacement players. So we've got maybe 3 new players for the money that they got for Grealish. And by making sure that they were hanging on to Grealish and pretending that these were to supplement him, it meant that the other clubs then didn't increase the asking price because they knew that we just had a heap of money. So, you know, I'm very disappointed personally that he left, but you know, intellectually, I think yeah, it's actually going to be better for the club because we're going to have a balanced squad. One injury is not going to then mean that a third of the season we can't win a game. So, you know, I think that as long as the players they brought in come good, then I think that it's gonna on balance put us in a better position.
Andrew, are you by a chance mixing our last two questions here? Are you by chance a fan of the TV show Ted Lasso?
Do you know? I haven't watched it. Is it broadcast or is it streaming? Because where we are,
It's
um,
streaming on Apple.
yeah, we can't stream because you know we're so remote that we have satellite internet, which is fine for speed and everything, but it's like the old days. It's metered, and if you use up too much, in fact,
Hmm.
it was brilliant doing this today because our allocation rolls over on the 5th, and we'd run out. What it does is it throttles you right down to kind of pedestrian speed. So if we were to stream anything, probably even just one movie or something like that, it would really set us back for the rest of the month. So anything that's streaming, I'm afraid I'm kind of behind the curve on, and don't get the opportunity to watch it, unfortunately.
Well, when you travel somewhere, that's one to check out for sure. That show is great. I think you'd love it. Let me ask you this: a big fan of your Paul McGrath novels. Do you have any plans to continue that series, or are you sort of exclusively focused on Reacher at this point moving forward?
Well, we're kind of searching for an answer to that ourselves because and I'm so it really makes me happy that you said that, Ryan. Thank you, because I loved writing those books. Of all the ones that I've done on my own, those were the ones that I was most proud of and I most enjoyed writing. And I had expected until that fateful car journey home from the launch of the second one of those, I had hoped to keep going with them for a long time, and I haven't given up on that hope. Still would like to. It's just a question of finding a balance because it took a really long time to get into the groove and get the Sentinel written, and then we were able to do Better Off Dead, a little more efficiently because we'd learned from the experience. And so maybe next year, if we can accommodate it, I would love to do at least one more. If not, I don't know whether it's feasible to do two a year. It's a lot of work, but if I could do it, I really would love to because yeah, I love those books and I love that character, and I would love to keep going with it if I can.
That's my hope. I'd love to see that continue. If I get a vote, I want you to do two books a year.
Thank you. Well, I will
No
try.
pressure.
You might have to send me extra coffee to fuel me through those late nights. But I will give it my best shot, and I will, if it's humanly possible, I'll make it happen.
Well, we're just going to be hoping for a lot of snow in Wyoming then. You'll be stuck inside writing away. So what moment of your career so far are you most proud
Um, I guess. I mean, there's a lot of, Tasha and I have this thing where, there's so much in publishing that's beyond your control. You can write the very, very best book, that anybody's ever written, and it's launched on September the 11th or something, and no one buys it. There are all sorts of things that can happen that are outside your control that can mess you up. So what we try to do is any good news along the way, we try to enjoy it and celebrate it. So looking back, there's been numerous ones. I mean, it's very hard to get away from how you feel when you hold the first physical copy of your first book in your hand. I mean, that is a moment that you'll never relive. It doesn't matter how many more books you write; they're not going to be your first. So that is a really, really critical moment. I love that. There are little moments along the way. It's lovely if you go to a writers' conference. The first couple that you go to, no one's got any idea who you are or what you do. And if you go, when you go to one and people know you because they've read your books, that's absolutely lovely. Although, I have struggled a little over the years because a good friend of mine, Andrew Gross, his surname is similar to mine. and he started out writing with James Patterson. And I remember one BoucherCon, I think it might have been the one in Long Beach. I remember, at the end of a panel, you go to the signing room and you sign in your books, and then the very last guy that came up to me to have his book signed, he said to me, "I really, really love your books," and I'm feeling lovely, right? And he says, "You just got so much better after you stopped writing with Patterson." So I said, "I would actually be here."
Oh,
So there are things that are almost lovely. There was one little moment. I mean, I hope it doesn't sound horrible, but one of the early BoucherCons that I went to, you know how you line up to get your pack, with your badge and your book bag and everything, and it's all divided into letters of the alphabet, A to E, F to H, whatever it might be. And I was lining up in the G section, and I didn't have to say my name. The person knew and gave me the bag, and I mean that was wonderful. I love that. And then with with the Sentinel, we were worried. There was a question mark. It is a change. Bringing me on board. We were trying to convince make people comfortable that it wasn't going to be a huge change. That it was really going to be business as usual. It was like just taking Lee and kind of cutting 15 years off him and putting him back in front of the computer. We were hoping that everybody would be accepting, but you always wonder. And then when we got the phone call to say that the Sentinel was at #1, that I guess is the crowning achievement for me. I love that. And so a huge thank you to everybody who took a chance on us and bought the book and who liked it. So I guess that it would be hard to beat that. I think
#1's pretty hard to beat. I agree. Congratulations.
In your next BoucherCon, by the way, your goodie bag, you're not going to know if it's going to be under Andrew Grant, Andrew Child. They're going to have to search for it a little bit now because you have so many different names you're going to go by.
Maybe they'll give me 2. That would be good.
There you go. Well, listen, Andrew, it's been so great catching up with you, man. Before we let you go, can you tell us a little bit about Better Off Dead and what readers should expect from this book?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because we really had a blast with Better Off Dead. When we sat down to write the Sentinel, we kind of talked about what we wanted to achieve with it, because Lee wanted this thing where he wanted Reacher kind of nudged a little bit more into a technological arena that was a little bit closer to the 21st century, because Reacher had kind of fallen behind a little. And I wanted to kind of link back to some of the, in the earlier books, Reacher was hilarious. He was sarcastic, he was witty, and I wanted to kind of put one foot forward and what, to bridge those two. So we had a bit of a concept for it when we started out. And that, we had those things in mind. Better Off Dead, we thought, okay, well, we don't have to keep inventing the wheel. We've done those things. Now we can just do what we want. So I think it kind of feels much more like an old school Reacher book. And what we did was, in fact, I freaked Lee out a little bit because I actually wrote the opening to it without telling him what I was going to do, and then sent it to him to see what he thought. And what you find in the beginning of the book is there's this confrontation breaks out in a kind of parking lot right on the border between Arizona and Mexico. There's a huge guy standing there waiting for a meeting, and the person that he's supposed to be meeting doesn't show up. 4 guys show up instead. These 4 guys think that they can take down this huge stranger and of course fail, but a woman steps out from the shadows and shoots him in the chest. Next thing you know, you're at the morgue in the local town where they're going through his possessions, and he has a passport, an ATM card, passport's expired, an ATM card and a folding toothbrush. And the name in the passport says Jack Non-Reacher. And then that's the end of the opening. So to find out what happened, you're just going to have to buy the book.
I can highly recommend it. I thought that was a brilliant opening. I'm glad you shared this story with us, because I was glued to it. Like, wait, yeah, it was fabulous.
The reason that I did it without telling him was that we'd been talking about it, and we, the scene that is now kind of the second, the kind of chapter 2. That was what we talked about as where we would pick up the story, and that's what I had in the back of my mind. And then I just thought, no, we could do it this way instead, and it would just, amp up the odds right at the beginning, right out of the gate, and see, see what people think about it, and I hope people enjoy it, because we certainly enjoyed writing it, and I think that often comes through.
Mhm. Well, that was absolutely fantastic. And really, Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time, to join us today. We're very excited about Better Off Dead, and please, everybody, get out there and get your coffee.
Well, thank
Yes,
you
in
so
stores
much.
October 26th, right?
Correct.
That is correct. Yeah. And so, Kim, Ryan, thank you so much for having me as a guest. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you guys, and I hope we can do it again soon.
We'd love that. Thanks so much, Andrew.